city gates.
Gloomwood was a refreshing experience that I can only really put into words like this. I didn't realize how itchy I was until I scratched my shoulder randomly. Yeah, I know that sounds a bit odd, but hear me out for a second. If you're wondering why I sound a little more hush-hush than I normally do, it's because I've moved recently, so I'm trying to be conscious of everyone around me until I get used to doing this. Or at least used to doing this where I am now. What I'm really saying is that I didn't realize how much I wanted to play another Dishonored-style immersive sim game until I played Gloomwood. And the best part is the game is not even done yet, hence why I put so far in the beginning of the video. But before I get ahead of myself, let's break the game down a bit without spoiling too much before I give my final verdict on it. You know how this goes at this point. That said, I'm sure you can tell how I feel about the game just based off of my first few statements about it, but I'd appreciate it if you remain seated until the end of the showing. Oh, no, I mean it. Lock the doors behind them, Jerry. Now that you've got no choice but to hear me yap about this game for about maybe 10 minutes, I don't know yet, let's start with the premise of Gloomwood. In Gloomwood, you play as the Doctor. No, not that one. Not that one. Nope, not that one either. As you escape captivity to investigate this plague or curse that has overrun the Victorian city that you found yourself trapped in to get to the bottom of this mess. Yeah, you escape in the tutorial, but you are still very much around a cage. And unfortunately for you, this cage is full of huntsmen and monsters looking to chop, shoot, claw, and possibly peck your brains out. The gameplay of Gloomwood very much complements this feeling, but it doesn't leave you completely helpless either. Surprisingly. Like, it genuinely surprised me. I figured you have less tools at your disposal, but it wouldn't be an immersive sim if you didn't have a lot of ways to go about your day, night, evening, you get it. Despite how you see me play in the video that you're currently watching right now, hi, you should also know that you're allowed to go in guns blazing too, if you have the ammo for it. Gloomwood uses a lot of the formula that survival horror games of yesteryear use. And with that comes the resource management you come to expect from survival horror games of the late 90s or early 2000s. That said, I never struggled for ammo myself. I played on the normal difficulty, but there are 4 other difficulties that reflect the phases of the moon. It breaks down like this: crescent, half moon, full moon, and blood moon. Easy to the hardest difficulty. Half moon difficulty is the difficulty I played on, and if you tend to lean more towards stealth in games like this, which it very much encourages, you won't have any issues. Enemies on this difficulty are generally slow to detect you, so you'd have to be playing risky to get caught most of the time, which is very easy to do if you're getting overconfident like me. Although, if you have a lot of competency, then that leads to overconfidence, I'd imagine, because then you get complacent. You get my point. You get a lot of resources on half moon difficulty, so it is indeed very easy to get overconfident and then run into a trap. That's the overall point that I'm making, but you know what? You can do whatever you want. Do what you gotta. Speaking of resource management, the game uses grid-based inventory that some of you may be used to if you played Capcom's greatest survival horror game yet, Resident Evil 6. I'm sorry, it's been a while since I've given that game a jab. Resident Evil 4's inventory system is the one that most people are going to think about when they are messing around with their suitcase in this game. That said, I should mention, I say that said a lot too. I should also mention that the inventory is diegetic. So you'll need a flat surface to sit your suitcase on so you can mess with your stuff in it, or even drag stuff out of it. If you try to do it next to a cliff, not going to happen. If you try to do it on an uneven surface, it might work, but your suitcase might actually appear above your head rather than directly in front of you. If you try to do it on the corner of a desk, then you might put the suitcase down there and it'll open just fine, but you'll need to turn your character. You'll need to turn the doctor to face the suitcase so you can do what you got to do. I think it's cool. That's all I'm really saying. I think it's cool. Before I move on, there is a quick extra touch on combat here that I want to talk about. While I said you can go guns blazing earlier, I should let you know that the revolver isn't that powerful. Blasphemous, I know, for a survival horror game, but what are you going to do? You should also know that your cane blade is only really strong when you backstab an enemy with a charge strike, or if you strike at their head. If you're just slicing willy-nilly at their body, it's going to take much longer to kill them than it would be if you just shot them with the revolver. So my advice is to rely on the cane blade as much as you can, then use the revolver and any other weapons that you have, as well as any other tools you have that you get later to supplement that. Or if you're tired of being quiet, you can just shoot everyone in the room with a shotgun. You get that much later, but it's definitely an option. Unsurprisingly, the game has a quick save feature. I didn't use it initially since the Half Moon difficulty doesn't have it enabled by default. The easiest difficulty does though. But I did end up using it later though, because save points started to get sparser and I was already near the end of the early access point, or at least wherever it currently is at the time of my recording anyway. Definitely a drug, that quick save thing. Anyway, I didn't once have a moment in this game where I got bored, and despite it being survival horror, I can't really say it had me scared or afraid to push forward. The doctor is squishy, yes, but the game only really made me tense on occasion, like when I was forced to kind of just very lightly walk through some areas. But otherwise, unless the sound design, the excellent sound design, mind you, decided to give me a nice little jolt, I was perfectly fine. Heck, if anything, the game is a lot more silly than I thought, or at least I took it as something a lot more goofy or campy, if you will, than what I was expecting before I even booted up the game the first time. The huntsmen are not unsettling, and more often than not, they come off as bumbling henchmen, until they find you, that is. Then they're a little intimidating, but then so is any enemy in any game that discovers you when you're trying to be sneaky. But once you get to the halfway point of the current version of the game, you'll be relieved to see them again, because if I wasn't stacked on ammo, some of the later encounters, they would have been a lot trickier to pull off. Also, the game does have its tenser moments later in the scary department, not just, what the enemy is doing or what kind of loud sounds they can throw at you. No, some enemies genuinely get a little unsettling later, but initially for the first half of the game, you're okay. If you're wondering why I'm phrasing it this way, it's because I'm trying to say that this game is definitely worth playing for not just people who like survival horror or immersive sim style games, but for people who are curious and want to jump into Gloomwood, but because it has a horror tag on it, they're like, oh, I don't know if I can take that. You'll be fine. Now, is that a drawback on this game if you were expecting a lot of scary moments for it? I'd say so, yeah, that'd be a drawback. But I think most people are going to be playing Gloomwood if they haven't already started playing it already or just waiting until 1.0. I feel like a lot of people are walking into this expecting more Dishonored than, say, Silent Hill, Resident Evil, whatever. They want that immersive sim probably more than horror, or at least that's what I walked into it for. I really like Dishonored. And before you say it, yes, I know the game, in a way, has more in common with Thief than it does Dishonored. And I know Thief predates Dishonored, but I haven't played Thief, so the closest point of reference I have is Dishonored. Just saying. Before I get to my final verdict, I want to backpedal a little bit. I just want to give a quick shout out to the visuals of the game. They aren't pretty, per se, but they fit the vibe and have their own flair that I'd argue will be pretty timeless going forward, because they're not striving for hyper-realistic graphics of today. They made something that looks like something I would have played back in the late PS1, maybe early PS2 era, that is perfectly fine and stylized. I like it. I like it a lot. Finally, on the topic of the game being an immersive sim, you should definitely treat it as such. I know this is kind of what I've implied the entire time, but I just want to express that a bit more. Get creative. Break a window. Throw a bottle. Explore the area. Parkour on everything you can. Stack stuff to climb on, etc. The more creative you get with the game, the more rewarded you'll feel in the long run. I cannot recommend that enough. Now, this will come as a shock, but Gloomwood gets a go for it from me. Shocking, I know. And I can't wait until the full release of the game to wrap up this weird, really weird, but intriguing tale. But if you don't want to wait until the full release, whenever that is, you could pick up Gloomwood now on Steam, Android, and GeForce Now for $20. which in my opinion is well worth the money. The game, if you know what you're doing, it can be as quick as 4.5 hours right now, if you're speeding through it, I guess, according to how long to beat. But on average, I'd say you can clear the game in its current state at about 8 to 10 hours, more or less based on difficulty and on how creative you get. And that wraps up this review. I really wanted to get this review out sooner, but I'm not going to go too deeply into it. But there were a lot of issues with my previous PC. I have a new one now. That was a nightmare to get all that done, but it finally got done. And now I'm back on the editing train. I'm redoing settings and stuff that weren't saved to my computer when I got stuff moved over, and you get it. Not to mention that things in general just got busier with work and stuff like that. But now that I'm back into the swing of things, I can actually get this review out sooner than I intended. Well, sooner than I intended being relative to when I originally was going to release it. I was originally going to release this at the beginning of the month, and I thought I wouldn't get to it until maybe the end of the month. So my intent on when I wanted to release it swapped. But I wanted to release this during October because spooky month. So here it is. And in case you're curious, I am playing through Silent Hill 2 Remake, but I don't want to review that. It's one of those games where I'm like, this is mine. Mine in the sense that I want to play this because I want to play it, not I want to play this because I want to play it, plus I want to review it. No, it's just a game that I want to play on my own time. But if you want the long and short of how I feel about that one too, as a little bonus, it's fantastic. And I definitely recommend picking it up on PC or whatever. No, I think it's just PC and PS5. Yeah. So there you go. 2 reviews in 1. And with that, I hope you enjoyed your stay. I'm TUSDarryl, and I'll catch you guys later. Bye.